On to week 2. It's time to dive into wide receiver tiers and ranks to ensure you're bringing home the W this week and nailing every single one of those lineup decisions. We're going to kick it off with the S tier. CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Malik Neighbors, Brian Thomas, Puka Nacua, Nico Collins, and then at the top, wide receiver 1 this week, Jamar Chase. Obviously, very disappointing performance last week. Are you still confident in firing him up this week?
Yeah, of course. I mean, like, Joe Burrow has really struggled against the Browns in general. Joe Burrow's been perennially a slow starter. Burrow's averaged 13.2 points per game against the Browns in his last 7 games, only 197 passing yards. Of course, that's going to filter down to Jamar Chase. Maybe we should have expected that last week. But I think both he and T. Higgins bounce back against this Jacksonville defense this week. Even if Travis Hunter is out there playing a lot more defense than he did last week, I think Travis Hunter is going to struggle against the superstar guys like Jamar Chase, T. Higgins.
Also, Travis Hunter, not the biggest, not the most physical. That is where Jamar Chase and T. Higgins do feast. In our A tier, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Drake London, T. Higgins, Lab McConkey, Marvin Harrison, AJ Brown, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and Garrett Wilson. Marvin Harrison, on the thumbnail, we saw some great usage last week, being moved around, being schemed up some touches. Are we finally going to see the Marvin Harrison that we drafted him to be last year?
I think so. And I was quite bullish on Marvin Harrison this offseason. I thought that, a nice quiet offseason for him would work. Last year, he had all the off-field contract disputes and stuff like that, which kind of dragged over. And now we're seeing a guy who, as you pointed out, isn't just running vertical routes. So I've got plenty of hope for him. I think that going up against a Panthers defense where the Cardinals are favored by almost a touchdown looks particularly good for him. I thought the Panthers defense last week looked particularly poor. So I've got every faith in him. I just also want to just touch on Amon-Ra St. Brown dropping down into this tier. The volume just wasn't there. And we've talked about this in the past. If the volume's not there for a guy who relies on volume, it's going to be a tough day.
Yeah, that lower A dot type player needs the volume to buoy the less valuable targets. One person who did see insane volume last week, though, Garrett Wilson, 44% target share. Kind of stuck my neck out a little bit this offseason, believing that Garrett Wilson could get it done despite the hate because of just ridiculous volume. Do you think that this is a sign of things to come? I talked in our quarterbacks video that Justin Fields, I thought, played his best ever game, stepping up in the pocket and looking like a true NFL caliber passer. Do you think that's a 1 week blip or something we can believe in?
Well, I think it's got the potential for something that we can believe in, but I don't think the Jets are necessarily going to score 30 points every week. And because of that game environment which they were in, I mean, this is probably the kind of ceiling end of it, right? You say 44% target share, but that was on 22 pass attempts. So, we're going to need to see more from the passing game in general to have complete trust every single week. But I don't think against this Buffalo defense, the Ravens were able to pass all over. Look, they allowed a huge amount of points. They allowed the most passing yards last week. They allowed the 16th most passing yards, so they weren't particularly great whatsoever. And it seemed like the Ravens could have passed for more if they wanted to. They just ran the ball extensively. Then it'd be nice to see Garrett Wilson come out and test them from the get-go. And yeah, he belongs at this end of the tiers for now until we see reason to drop him down.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, if you are finding this for the first time, welcome in. Make sure you're checking out the rest of our rankings video and let me make your life easier. Hit the subscribe button. Our videos will get pumped into your feed and we'll make sure you're getting all the content you need to be bringing home W's in your fantasy matchups. Over in the B tier, we've got a fairly chunky tier here. Courtland Sutton at the top. Good, solid, just feels a really reliable wide receiver 2 moving forward. And then Zay Flowers had a ridiculous performance last week. Do you think that Zay Flowers could potentially be creeping into the A tier?
I do. And like I talked about in the offseason, the one thing that Zay Flowers needed to do really was have some positive touchdown regression. He only had 7 touchdowns across the first 2 seasons. Last year, he only had 2 touchdowns on 7 red zone targets. And it was easy to kind of see that positive touchdown regression appearing. But what I didn't see happening was him taking a bigger step forward in how many snaps he played. Like he had 100% route share against the Bills, 47% target share. Again, it's always a little tricky when you talk of these run heavier teams. We'd like to see even more pass volume, but Zay looked excellent. The way they were using him, we know he's going to see plenty of screens, plenty of design work, but in general, it was great. And the Browns had the third most plays per game last week. So if the Browns try to keep the pace up, the Ravens are favored by 12 points, then this could be another productive game for him.
And then moving on, we've got Devontae Adams up next. For me, showed immediate rapport with Matthew Stafford. I thought there was that mind meld that we've seen with Devontae Adams have with other quarterbacks. Solid numbers, 30% target share. Yes, sharing an offense with Puka Nacua, there's going to be, a lot of targets go his way. But between the two of them, 70% of targets from Matthew Stafford went to the two wide receivers. When the offense is going to be that consolidated into two guys, it feels like both of them can be plug-and-play options.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, Tyler was all over Devontae Adams all offseason. I think he's probably one of his biggest risks in best ball, and it looked great for him. The Titans defense, I do think, is a little bit better than people are still giving it credit for. But the Rams on the road, I think that there's going to be enough there for Devontae Adams where I wouldn't have any concerns this week.
And then up next, we got the two Bucks guys ranked back-to-back, Mike Evans, Emeka Egbuka. Obviously, ridiculous week last week from Emeka Egbuka. Got the 2 touchdowns. Do we think that reverts back and we see a Mike Evans touchdown this week?
Well, I just think Emeka Egbuka is better than Mike Evans at this point in their career. And I know that we've had some hot takes on this channel about Mike Evans before, which haven't always made us the most popular. But I think the way that Egbuka wins, the way that Egbuka plays is a little bit more reliable for fantasy at the minute. And I think that this week we're going to see Baker Mayfield trying to get the ball out quickly because last week he was the third most pressured quarterback. I don't think that's going to be any easier against this Texans defense. And I think that Egbuka is going to continue to see slightly better days in PPR. And maybe Mike Evans has these bigger weeks every now and again. But if you ask yourself as the Texans defense, who you're going to cover, I think they're probably still going to lean to putting Derek Stingley on Mike Evans more.
I also think Egbuka, moved into the slot more. Derek Stingley doesn't traditionally go in that sort of space. I think it makes it more natural if you just stick him on Mike Evans. One player that both of us were a little bit lower coming into last week.
3 tiers lower.
DK Metcalf. We saw, for me, interesting usage in terms of wasn't just forcing the ball downfield outside the numbers. He got some usage over the middle of the field in some inventive ways. 25% target share. Do you think that Rodgers was just a 1-week blip to get revenge on the Jets, or do you think that this could be something more than that moving forward?
Yeah, I do. And to be real, they had to move DK Metcalf about because Aaron Rodgers had the second lowest average depth of target last week. Like, he is not pushing the ball downfield. And if you're going to use DK Metcalf, you have to be able to do that. Against the Seahawks, it'll be very interesting to see whether DK Metcalf is as buoyed and wants a revenge game in the same way that Aaron Rodgers did.
Yeah, and then Tet McMillan up next. Bryce Young felt like he regressed hugely last week. I was really disappointed with him. The only good thing he did, I thought, was whenever he looked like he was throwing to McMillan. Does that mean there's potentially more chance we see an uptick in targets and then force the ball to him even more?
Hopefully. I mean, look, we know that Tetaroa, sorry, I'm still struggling with his name, is one of those guys who can be a real volume hog. We know the Panthers don't necessarily have many other options at the minute. They need to put in a good performance this week. Bryce Young needs to put in a good performance this week. And if we don't see that, then we're probably talking about dropping both of them further next week. But for now, I'm willing to lean into the draft capital for what we thought about him as a prospect coming into the league. And I'm not throwing everything out after 1 week.
Yeah, absolutely. And then rounding out the tier, we've got Devonta Smith, Terry McLaurin, and then we've got Ricky Pearsall on here. We're expecting Brock Bowers not to play this week. Brock Purdy. But at time of recording, I'd personally be dropping Ricky Pearsall into the tier C if Purdy is ruled out. Would you agree with me there, Tom?
It's a tricky one because there's not loads of options. And obviously we saw Mac Jones last year when he did play, he managed to keep Brian Thomas Jr. relevant. What I would say is that in those 7 games Mac Jones started, he averaged a 3.1% touchdown rate, which ranked 28th out of 35 quarterbacks, 6.4 yards per attempt, which ranked 31st, 202 passing yards per game at 30th. So Kyle Shanahan is going to have to work hard to get production out of Mac Jones. But Ricky Pearsall last year was used quite often vertically. Last week, we saw him breaking across the middle of the field more often. That's always very good for fantasy because, the targets are easier. They make life easier on him. So I've got enough faith where I'm willing to put a bit of trust in it this week against the Saints. And these were two fast-paced offenses last week. The Saints had the 7th most plays per game. The Niners had the 2nd most. The Saints, we've talked about this, they've been very no huddle already. We know Kellen Moore likes to play quickly. And if that keeps the game flowing, then there's potential for Pearsall to see a decent volume.
And then heading into tier C, we've got DJ Moore, Travis Hunter. Now, on Travis Hunter, I feel so disappointed because I was hopeful he was going to be 100% used at wide receiver. He only got 63% snap share. We're hearing voice that he's going to start playing more on defense. Do you think that could potentially decrease his offensive snaps and maybe he becomes that headache of, do you start him this week, do you not?
Maybe. I'm not quite there yet because when I look at this matchup against the Bengals, it's like, okay, well, yeah, it would make sense for him to be out there on defense more, as we talked about at the top of this video. But do we expect the Jags to have to work hard to keep up with the Bengals? Yes. So is Trevor Lawrence going to be out there throwing to just Brian Thomas and then the guys behind him? Or are they going to force Travis Hunter out there so that it's more of a matchup problem for the Bengals? Seeing how this develops and seeing how this is going to go week to week, it's really intriguing. I think we kind of have to keep Travis Hunter in this little bit of a boom or bust here for now. Maybe he deserves to be slightly lower within it, but I'm comfortable purely because this game has got a 49.5 over under and the Bengals can't really stop anybody.
Yeah, and then you talked about boom bust. Deebo Samuel, 10 targets last week, 27% target share. Felt like Terry McLaurin was working through some rust. Do you think that we can believe in this sort of volume for Deebo Samuel, or do you think that's going to regress?
I think we probably can because they seem to be really concentrating. Dan Quinn's had some very positive coach speak about how they want to use Deebo. Obviously, it's a Thursday night game against Packers, so maybe by now people have a better idea than we do. But Kyle Borgononi of Fantasy Football has pointed out that Deebo's 40 snaps in the slot last week doubled his previous career high almost. And look, led the team in targets, led the team in receiving yards. That's worth leaning into. And maybe Green Bay will hold him down a little bit more, but I'm willing to say Deebo Samuel's somebody I'd like on my fantasy teams and feel like he'll be starting more weeks than not.
Yeah, and then obviously last week we saw the Xavier Worthy injury. Marquise Brown, he stepped up big time, 14 targets. We've got him ranked here next. Do you think that, I'm not sure 14 targets is sustainable, but do you think an increase in target share and potentially volume where there's basically no other receivers available?
Yeah, it's interesting because he also played 52% of his snaps from the slot, which was a career high. His previous high was like in the 40s. And maybe that was something as a result of Xavier Worthy going out. Maybe that's what they just plan on doing with Rashee Rice out. But you have to look at this as it's not going to carry on probably when Worthy or Rice or Worthy and Rice are both out there. But for now, I don't mind it. I mean, look, Hollywood Brown isn't particularly a good player. He's useful for fantasy right now, but I would just always be a little bit cautious with him. I mean, the team didn't even give him a good deal, did they?
I sold 2 shares of him in Dynasty already this week, and I think that potentially that's the move. If people are willing to pay for short-term production, I'd be looking to move on. George Pickens is up next. Now, here's someone that we are very different on this week. You've got him up at wide receiver 20. He's down at wide receiver 43 for me this week. I'm concerned about this Giants defensive line, forcing Dak to get the ball out quickly. You're obviously not concerned.
Well, last week he ran 20% more horizontal breaking routes than he did in 2024 compared to his average. That's something which I was hoping to see. I wanted to see him breaking across the middle of the field rather than it just being deep vertical shots all the time. The Giants, yes, they get that pressure out, but then once you get past that kind of defensive line, there's not an awful lot behind them that's stopping the ball. They gave it the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers in week 1. So I think George Pickens disappointed. I started him in my home league when I had better options on the bench and it hurt me, but I believe in him for week 2 in this game.
Yeah, and then rounding out the tier, we've got Jameson Williams, Jacoby Myers, Rome Odunze, Calvin Ridley, and can you believe it, Tyreek Hill down here in tier C. Any of those that jump out at you at the moment?
Well, Calvin Ridley was always going to have a tough matchup against the Broncos. Maybe last week our ranking on him and my ranking in particular was a touch aggressive, but I'm willing to keep putting a little bit more faith in him for the time being. And then Tyreek Hill, like, it just doesn't look. I mean, we've got Tyreek Hill bingo already. I think it was Hayden Winks said on Twitter the other day, he's got the off-field issues. He's kicking off on the sideline, shouting at people, looking angry all the time, and looking ineffective. Now, the Dolphins, they just don't seem to be able to maximize Tyreek Hill in the way that they used to be. The Patriots, they were banged up at cornerback last week. They gave up a good amount of fantasy points to the wide receiver position, the fifth most of the week. So maybe Miami can get things going. But I just think Miami are probably bottom 2, bottom 3 team in the league right now.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And then we're going to move on to the next tier. But before we do, make sure you're hitting those comments down below. We will answer 100% of your questions all the way up to kickoff on Sunday to make sure you're getting those lineups perfectly correct. We're also taking trade questions, Dynasty or Redraft. We'll give you our opinions. In the tier T, we've got Keenan Allen. I thought looked like the old Keenan Allen in Los Angeles. Really, really impressive last week. Are you comfortable maybe as like a wide receiver 3 flex play?
Yeah, I think that's kind of fine. I mean, goes up against the Raiders this week, and the Raiders are a team I think are going to take the air out of games at times, but the way that they used him was encouraging. And the one thing, the end zone, that's where it matters, isn't it? Like, touchdowns make such a big difference in fantasy football. The relationship Keenan Allen has with Justin Herbert in the end zone is something that I'm willing to rely on. I've got no problems going back to him.
Yeah. And then we've also got Jerry Jeudy, Keon Coleman. I'm a little bit surprised how low you are on Keon Coleman this week. I'll be honest, Tom. I've got him up at wide receiver 30. You've got him down at wide receiver 46. I thought he looked great last week. The underlying numbers were there. The target share were there. Why so low?
So this is more of a comment on the Bills offense. I thought Keon Coleman looked fantastic as well. Probably outside of Josh Allen, the best player for the Bills that day. But Bills offense has taught me over the last couple of years that they are not consistent. They are not teams who are just going to continually rely on one wide receiver week in, week out. Maybe wide receiver 46 is a bit low, and maybe I'll bump him a little bit higher as we go. But also, are you not a believer in Sauce Gardner? Do you not think Sauce Gardner is going to be all over Keon Coleman this week?
I think that the Jets play left and right corner, and I'm worried that Keon Coleman's going to get moved to get some Brandon Stephens, and I'm definitely not a believer in Brandon Stephens.
That's a very fair argument, and that alone probably bumps him up at least 5 spots.
And then we've got Khalil Shakir, Cedric Tillman, who I thought looked great last week, saw some decent numbers, got the touchdown. Any confidence in him this week?
Yeah, because as much as the Ravens' defense looks better on paper than it did last year, they completely just gave up production to Keon Coleman and to the Bills in general. So I've got no qualms starting Cedric Tillman. I think in the games that he's played with Jerry Jeudy, he has typically been the alpha when uninjured.
Yeah, absolutely. You know that I don't need any opportunity to hype Cedric Tillman. Chris Olave. Now, the talent and the volume from last week, I thought maybe we'd sneak him up a tier, but he stays here down in the wide receiver 40s. What do you feel about him this week?
Yeah, this game, the Niners won without Brock Purdy. I do worry that this is a game which is, destined for the under. Chris Olave, for his part, in games with Spencer Rattler, he's gone 8 for 107 and 7 for 54, which is encouraging. But I don't know. I just feel with Mac Jones and Spencer Rattler at quarterback, that's not necessarily a matchup that I really want to get too heavy in.
Yeah, maybe won't be too high scoring, but two guys I think that are incredibly boom bust to round out the tier though. Matthew Golden, Quinton Johnson. If you told me neither of them caught a ball this week, I'd believe you. If you told me that they've caught 2 touchdowns, I'd believe you. Is that just close your eyes, slot them in the flex and pray for the best?
Yeah, Matthew Golden last week I was a bit more aggressive on, but then we didn't see an awful lot from him. Obviously plays Thursday night against the Commanders, so maybe this week he's played more by the time people are watching this, and it's a bit easier going forward. Quentin Johnson, a lot of people don't like Quentin Johnson, but Jim Harbaugh does like Quentin Johnson, and it matters. And people can point to the touchdown production being fluky, but at a certain point, you just have to say, look, this is a guy who's getting into the end zone consistently, and there's plenty of wide receivers a lot higher up, guys like Puka Nacua, who can't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in the E tier, we've got your sleeper this week, Stephon Diggs. Find him all the way down here in the E tier. What is it this week that you like of him?
He plays Miami. We'll keep it as simple as that. Miami, atrocious. They're not a good defense. I know Stephon Diggs didn't look particularly amazing last week coming off his ACL, but the fact he's out there, the fact that they get this cupcake matchup, I'm willing to definitely put a little bit of faith, more than anything, that he could be very good this week.
Yeah, and then talking to Miami, we've got Jalen Waddle up next. Not 100% sure if he'll play with this shoulder injury, but if he does, good luck, I guess, if you're putting him in a lineup. And then rounding out the tier, two guys that had decent weeks last week, Michael Pittman, Jaden Reed, but we are both very low on them. Do you have any hope that they could make us look foolish?
I think it's still just kind of tricky. Like Jaden Reed, I think, has a good chance to hit the over on his receiving yards this week. He played 75% of his snaps from the slot, and the Commanders gave up 106 receiving yards to the Giants in the slot. So I've got some confidence there. Michael Pittman as well. It's just tricky knowing if what we saw from him last week is going to be consistent, or we see Josh Downs bounce back and earn targets in a bigger way. Josh Downs obviously only played in 3 wide receiver sets, was quite alarming. But for now, I'm kind of okay with it. It's more just a matchup, though, with the Colts playing the Broncos. That doesn't feel like one where I want to get too ahead of my skis.
Yeah, and then to round it out in the F tier, we've got Rashid Shaheed, Wan'Dale Robinson, Cooper Kupp, Adam Thielen, Romeo Doubs, and then my sleeper this week, Juju Smith-Schuster. Saw 5 targets last week, ran a route on 78% of dropbacks. I'm a little bit intrigued. If you're looking for a desperation dart throw of a flex and you just need maybe 8 to 10 points, I feel like you can do a lot worse than going finding Juju Smith-Schuster.
Yeah, I mean, I don't hate it. I think not many people would be willing to do it, but I think it makes plenty of sense.
Yeah, and if you have got any more start sit questions, dive into the comments below. We answer 100% of those questions as we head to kickoff, and make sure you're checking out the rest of these ranking videos that we've already dropped this week.